authors, Lisa Gardner and Gregg Hurwitz, who are going to make their way towards us. And we have cookies to celebrate. I'm going to sit over here and see if they can play without a grown-up. They initiated, not my idea.
Throwing us under the bus.
I challenge you. Right, so I'm sure you can figure out which one's Lisa and which one's because they're not named things like
I'm identifying as Lisa tonight. I need an upgrade.
So just to be clear, this is Greg with Orphan X, and we're just really excited about him talking about it. And this is Lisa over here, who has not one but 3 protagonists in her new novel. Can you see?
I was indecisive.
Sounds like I might have just turned off.
Anyhow, take it away, guys.
All right, I think I should start because I had the unique honor of getting to blurb this book,
It's true, he very kindly did.
which I loved. So it's that funny thing. Sometimes you have friends who you come across who, you know, people need a blurb and you're not quite sure what to say. And Lisa sent this to me. I love her writing. I love the character. Flora is one of my favorite characters, and she was in this. There's a whole bunch going on, and so I got to read this ages ago. I mean, you sent it to me way back when, and it's just a terrific book. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about is how you brought. I mean, you're right. There's 3 distinct protagonists, and they're all equals too. It's not like you're cheating in an extra protagonist. I mean, everyone gets equal screen time. How did you navigate that? I mean, were you thinking from the beginning that you were going to weave it all in and that everyone's going to have equal screen time, or what was the thought?
See, I was threatening to ask Greg where he got his ideas, so this is him just getting revenge up front. You will quickly realize we have a bit of a mutual admiration society here. I'm a huge fan. I did not get to read Into the Fire ages ago because my daughter got her hands on it first. There was actually some thumb wrestling involved. I lost. So I had to wait for her to read it before I was allowed to read it, because in our family we're all things Orphan X. It is, I think, one of the most exciting action series we've had in quite some time, and I'm always looking forward to the next adventure. So, 3 characters and When You See Me. Yeah, so it sounds like I had a plan, huh? It sounds like things were well thought out. Nope, not at all. For me, it was a fun book to write because it was almost like having an ensemble cast. I felt like I was in one of those big police procedures, and it was a lot of fun to approach from that way. In this day and age, you're seeing more major crimes where you have task force. You might have local police and the FBI. I'll be the first to say Flora, the vigilante, being allowed is a bit of a stretch, but I think we readers can handle it. And you know, she is the expert on Jacob Ness, so there's some reason why she's running around the woods of Georgia trying to figure out, you know, who killed a bunch of girls 15 years ago. So
Was that one of the most convoluted? Like, you had to figure out so many plot elements because it goes into her past, it goes into the present, it's stretching in all different directions. When you're sorting that, are you sorting it chapter to chapter? Do you have giant whiteboards and you're pulling your hair out? Like, what's the process when you're digging into that?
okay, now last year when we did this, wasn't I with oh goodness gracious, I was here with another author too whose name is
May Gardner.
yeah, May Gardner, and we were talking about this whole
It's a very hard last name to remember.
yeah, I know. That's why I was like, it's the 2 Gardners. I'm like, okay, was it you? Was it not? Yeah, see, this is the whole plotting versus pantsing thing. I am a diehard pantser. I have no idea what was going. This book opens with a point of view from a new character, girl. We know, thanks to a traumatic gunshot injury, she can't speak, she can't read, she can't write. That's a real condition called speech aphasia. That's all I knew about her. I didn't know why she was there, I didn't know how she'd find her voice, I didn't know how she'd ask for help, I didn't know what had happened next, and I didn't know who had done anything. So then I was off and writing. So tell us about your wife. Because what I love about your books is how tight the puzzle is, and all the things you think are random in the beginning all matter. I mean, Evan Smoke, your former assassin government agent, he's always one step ahead. So does that mean you as the author always have to be one step ahead?
No, I write myself into a lot of corners and then
Oh, thank
figure out
heavens.
how to get my way out of it. Yeah, and I have a really weird process that I have two giant monitors on my desk, and before I start writing, I have like ideas, snippets of dialogue, scenes, character stuff, all kinds of threads, and it's just a big mess on one of the screens. It's like 20 pages of bullet points. And before I start writing, I'll kind of mass them into rough categories, but it's just it's a mess. I always know the next or the first 3 or 4 chapters. I always know the opening run. And so I'll shape them up into that, and then I'm writing on this other screen that's blank. And when I write, then I go back, because as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, I just dropped a handkerchief in chapter 2. It'd be cool to do something in the middle and something on the end.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so they're both living and breathing, right? Because if I write a very strict outline, I find it's like I'm just filling it in. I already know what's happening, and it's not as exciting for me. And if it's not as exciting for me, it's not going to be as exciting for the reader.
I feel like we know too much. We can't help but broadcast. And like when people read books and it kind of seems kind of linear. See, if you never know what's going to happen next, you're guaranteed a surprise. So what inspired the setup for Into the Fire? Why that challenge for
Okay.
Orphan X?
So, Into the Fire, my last book was called Out of the Dark, and it was my homage to Day of the Jackal. When Orphan X goes up against the very corrupt president of the United States, and you're rooting for him to do so. And I always give the caveat, I did this before Donald Trump entered the primary. It was still science fiction that he would be a politician. But it was a giant book. A Day of the Jackal was one of those seminal books for me. And so what I wanted to do, that was the 4th Orphan X book, and I wanted to just reset everything. And I thought it would be so cool to have this story. It starts really, really small. I think of that nursery rhyme of the little old lady who swallowed a fly, and then she swallowed a spider to catch the fly, and then she swallowed a bird to catch the spider. And so it starts off with the normal level, like Evan gets the phone call, and Orphan X is someone who was pulled out of a foster home at the age of 12, trained to be a government assassin, and when we've met him in the series, he's kind of a pro bono assassin. He helps people who are in desperate need. And so the setup for this one, I wanted to do something with a setup that we're somewhat familiar with, which is in all those Hitchcock movies, it's Hitchcockian. It's not actually specific to Hitchcock, but when they say, if something ever happens to me, here's the envelope. And you can mail it.
Yeah.
And then that guy goes off, and we always follow the guy who goes off. And he's the hero, and he vanquishes his foes, and you never think about the poor schmuck with the envelope, right, with the insurance policy. I thought, wouldn't it be so interesting if it's the guy with the envelope this time, right? So the guy leaves it with him, and then he goes off, and next thing the guy with the envelope knows is this guy's brutally murdered. He has no idea what's going on. He opens the envelope, and the only thing in it is a single key. And he has no idea what to do, and the people who've murdered his cousin are now coming after him. So he calls 1-855 to nowhere, which you can call and see what
Well,
happens.
my local bookseller from White Birch told me to tell you thank you very much. She dials that number every few months just because she thinks it's so hard.
And that's his encrypted line, and asks for Evan's help. And so Evan shows up and thinks, I got this. And so, after going up against the President of the United States, this should be simple. And the case grows and grows and grows, and every time he thinks he has it under control, the next wave happens, and it gets bigger and bigger until somewhere around chapter 44, he finds himself in just the most impossible, dangerous position he could possibly be in, and one that's even more dangerous than any position he was in the last book. And so that was how you set a different challenge?
Yeah.
You have like a reference point with like, this book's going to be this sort of notion, and that was it for me, of like, how do I start small and intimate and then just like keep tightening the screws all the way through.
I wrote this whole book because I wanted to explore mass graves.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you go to some mass graves?
I looked at a lot of sad photos, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like
Where
you
did
said.
that, what was the interest? What was the...
I've gone to the Body Farm twice now. And the first one for a book 7 years ago. And then for me, the impetus for When You See Me, you're always looking for a new challenge for Evan. I generally pull something from real life. And in this case, in New Hampshire, we had a very famous cold case called Bear Brook. If anyone likes to listen to podcasts, NPR has a brilliant one. You'd even really like this, called Bear Brook. And so it's the real life case where for 30 years, they had 4 human remains they found in the woods in New Hampshire. So this opens in the
Right
woods.
by Lisa's house.
Actually, surprisingly, not that far away. And it was a state park where kids went to play, and sure enough, a bunch of kids playing in the woods, this is what they found. And it's the amount of, working with forensic anthropologists, DNA specialists. It took them 30 years just to know who the people were. It was a mother and 3 kids to figure out what had actually happened to them. And I just love that idea where, one, there's interesting things in the woods, since that's where I'm hiking all the time, but also that you can do some of the best policing possible and still not find the answers you're looking for. It can just be that complicated.
And in this case, it trails back to the past of one of your characters, right? So there's a lot of ways you wove in personal stakes on top of, right? Because it's a setup where it starts to interweave with all the characters' own biographies.
Yeah, but one of the things I found interesting, so Greg and I clearly know each other well professionally and personally, is some of the similarities in both of our characters' main arcs. So when I first started Dee Dee Warren, she's this shamelessly workaholic, kind of one-note detective. She just loves what she does, and she's not really interested in a larger world. When we first meet Evan, he's a loner. That's where he's comfortable, that's who he's trying to be. But by Into the Fire, what I thought was really fascinating and really fun as a reader was how his personal world has grown. And I particularly love the inclusion of a 4-legged friend to our loner that may or may not bear a startling resemblance to Greg's own dogs.
I have 2 giant Rhodesian Ridgebacks. One's 125 pounds and one's 100 pounds. And the story I tell is when the baby, who's the 125 pounder, when I'm writing and he wants to go somewhere, I'm here and he's big enough that he puts his whole head under my arm and just lifts my arm off the keyboard and just ushers me out the door to walk him. Until Lisa's been to the house and frolicked with the dogs. But so, yeah, Evan started out a loner, but, Barbara and I were talking about this. I wrote some years ago, I wrote Batman for a couple years for DC. And one of the
that vibe, yep.
one of the realizations I had about Batman was why Robin's around. Now, who here likes Robin more than Batman? There's always one. There's always one. Okay, fair enough. But Robin's always getting killed, and Robin's just got a rough road. And one of the things I realized is Robin's there so Batman has someone to talk to, right?
That makes great sense, yeah.
Because drama is the interactions between people, and they tweak each other and they tease each other, and you bring out it's just like us, right? So much of what we learn about ourselves comes out, for better and worse with our parents and our friends and our kids and our partners. And so with Evan, he starts off, relatively alone, but Hellbent, that's the 3rd book in the series, finds him there's a young woman that he's tasked with the care of, who's very much like a charge, the way that Robin is to Bruce Wayne. And she's a brilliant 16-year-old hacker. Her name is Joey. She's Josephine Morales. Real smart ass. She really can push his buttons. She's really difficult. She's really complicated. She's really dark. She's very brilliant. She's very funny. And I was supposed to kill her at the end of Hellbent. And I got all the way there to the end, and I just thought, I can't do it. She was so much fun to write, and she brought out so many layers of Evan that I had to keep her there and around, And it's something I noticed. One of the things that's really interesting with the collision of your protagonists is they all bring out a different side of each other because they're all colliding in this plot. So Flora is so different than Dee Dee, right? It's everyone's coming at the same case from markedly different angles.
So one of the challenges for me having 3 main characters in one book, and I did it partly because so many readers or people I'm Team Dee Dee, I'm Team Kimberly, I'm Team Flora. It's well, why pick? I'll just bring everyone into the next novel. And it was fascinating to have this one crime scene. We have the secluded town in Georgia. There are bodies turning up in the woods. Clearly something bad happened. But how bad? What happened? And it's fun to have Kimberly, who's, the Fed. She's more conservative, she's more, color within the lines. You have Dee Dee, who's still, eating her way through Georgia. But we do discover hates hiking. She's a city girl. It was news to me too, it was kind of fun. And then we have Flora, who's pretty stressed out and playing with a butterfly knife the entire time. Because my daughter last year got a butterfly knife, so I thought Flora should have one. You have some fun toys in your book too, and some of them you own as well. See, this is where writers get our ideas, from our own desks.
Yeah, my favorite thing is I have a friend who's a former Green Beret who started Strider Knife Company, and the thing with Strider knives, that's the knife that Evan uses, is it's got a little shark fin on the top of the back of the blade, and so when it's in your pocket, when you pull it out, and if you hook it on your jean pocket or your cargo pants, when you pull it out, it flicks open like it's a switchblade, but it's a folding knife, which is much more reliable than a switchblade.
Yeah.
And so so I have a pretty good knife collection, a pretty good vodka collection. Evan drinks the world's finest vodkas, and one of the things that was very cool that happened was in the second book, there's a company that only sells vodka in Texas, and they started to get all these phone calls from around the country of people ordering it. And they're like, where did you hear about this? They said, well, it's in the Nowhere Man. It was Dash Vodka. So they called, they're like, who's this drunk novelist who's like increasing our sales? And they called me, and so the last couple of years, they sponsored the book tour. And then what has started to happen is all my foreign publishers, because, we're published in all these different languages, send their, like, this is the best, this is best, Polish vodka you must have. And so I start getting them from everybody, and then companies are starting to send them to me, and they're engraving them, and we reached a point, and what's funny is my actual drink is bourbon. Right? I mean, not that I'll turn down a vodka, but my wife finally said to me at some point, we were getting like 1 to 3 bottles a day, right? And I already have like 50 bourbons at home, right? So my wife finally said to me, look, for every bottle that comes in, one has to leave. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to get up really early and start drinking early, but I think I can do that. So, so the toys are fun. The toys are fun.
One of the things I really like about Evan and the way you do the vodka, because it's not something I would drink. But I have to say,
you drank it at my house.
Well,
don't you?
You put a lot of sugar and lemon in it. At that point, the vodka was incidental. At least that's how I'm remembering it. But I love the sensibility Evan has after some of these really, really intense action sequences, or him having to go clean up a situation. He comes back, and the time and attention he will spend on that one shot of vodka. By the time you're done, you're like, I kind of want vodka. I'm going to drink, but it sounds like such a good idea right now. And I like his living wall. Like, again, for a loner character, there's all these moments between the floating bed, the living wall, aloe vera, his plant version of Robin, I guess. Because if all else fails, he can talk to his plant.
That's right. That's right. Well, those are all those little nuances that we bring up.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. When you think about, let's talk about Flora, because she's my favorite. When you think about her first, what do you think about? Do you think about her will? Do you think about like emotional or psychological states? Do you think about specifics to her? Do you think about her tone of voice and her darker edge? Do you think about what's the way that you conceive of her?
This is actually a fun question and a fun way of thinking about characters. So, Flora is a survivor. She was once kidnapped by this terrible predator, Jacob Ness. She was held captive for 472 days. She's trying very hard to get her life on track. I did some work with various survivor groups. Tonight we are supporting a local nonprofit, Chrysalis, that works with survivors of such situations. And talking to them, it was somewhat the will, but also the edginess. Like when I picture Flora, she's in motion. She doesn't sit well. She doesn't have a great attention span, which, difficulty focusing is a common element of PTSD that we don't always talk about. Like she talks about she was kidnapped when she was in college. Going back to school for her doesn't feel like a real option. She can't imagine sitting in a crowded room like this. She'd need to know where the exits are. She'd need to have clear lines of sight. It's just that return to normalcy is just a little too much for her. So what is she going to be instead? And the sense of a person who is still trying so hard to define herself and is broken but knows she's broken is the element to her that I've always liked. She's trying to figure this thing out. She doesn't really know what she's doing. And I think we can relate to that. Like I think there's elements of Evan, even though he's this, super capable, sharpshooter and this and that, his desire to connect, his desire for redemption. Because once he ran around killing people because the government told him to, now the government wants him dead, which is kind of a bummer. But his desire to figure out who he is going to be now I think is really the compelling part of his story.
It's so funny. I mean, I don't know if you find the same thing. I don't really realize what the books are mean to me psychologically till I'm done writing them.
Yeah.
And I didn't figure, there's whole aspects of Orphan Acts that have a lot more to do with me than I ever thought. You know, going on book 4, I was like, oh, that's why I'm playing with this, you know?
Yeah.
And when we meet Evan, he's raised under the 10 Assassins Commandments. You know, how you do anything is how you do everything, assume nothing. There's all these rules. But what's so weird is when we meet him, he's breaking all of them.
Yeah.
Right? And it's this funny thing of like, you know, I think we're always in a process of becoming. We're always in a process of figuring out what things we sacrifice or let go of to move forward to an understanding. And for him, that means literally moving away from perfection and intimacy. Because as we know, dealing with people, interacting with people, it's messy business.
And he can't control all the variables.
No.
And he's been raised to control all the variables.
That's right. You know, and so that there's a lot of that. And so it's interesting. So with Flora, you think the part you connect to with her always being emotion is that the searching part of you that leads you to challenge and do different plots and bring 3 protagonists in, and like is that a restless spirit? You're a big traveler, right? You have a lot. You like striving for new challenges. Your books have ranged and grown enormously since you wrote your first one at the age of 9.
He was 10. That's right. I think we bring our own hopes to our novels. It's hard not to. And I think Flora trying to feel like a better, stronger, more complete person. She's trying to go from surviving to thriving, which is a phrase you hear a lot. And I have to tell you, this book has one of my favorite scenes I've written in 30 years. And I think when everyone gets to it, they'll know exactly what scene it is. But it's such a great scene for her. I think we also bring our biggest fears to novels. Part of the reason this character, Girl, because she doesn't know her own name, came to me is here is someone who cannot communicate. She can't speak. She can't read. She can't write. For people in our profession, can you think of anything more horrifying? Partly because we never stop talking, in case you haven't noticed. And it was, I think, again, that's how the creative process works out for us. Our books are a little bit of an exercise in working through some fears and then hopefully presenting some hopes. And then you guys get to realize how terribly neurotic we really are.
Should we go to questions, or what do you think?
Oh,
What do
you could. I was, now my mind's just gone blank. Hold on, while I read it. Greg and I were talking earlier, we did a podcast, which you can access on our website, or you can listen to it on iTunes or whatever you'd like to do. And we were talking about Evan as both a loner and then trying to work his way into human connection, and how difficult it would be to write a series character that didn't move in that direction. To have somebody who was truly alone in every book just wouldn't work, because you do accumulate connections as you move along in the series, right?
And that's, you know, it's funny, I think why it took so long in my career to write this, which I, you know, this is to land on a series. There's one line in Orphan Acts around which, for me, the whole series coalesces, and that's when Jack Johns, who's his handler and father figure, takes him out of a foster home at the age of 12. And it's the first time he explains to him that his job is basically going to be a dispensable killing machine to go in places where the U.S. isn't allowed to be. And if anything ever happens to him, he's a full cutout guy. Like, no one's going to come save him. And he says to him, the hard part won't be turning you into a killer. The hard part will be keeping you human.
I love that line.
And thank you. And it's like, the thing that's weird that took me a little while to figure out about that is that's actually such a curse. Because if he was just raised to be the killing machine, we know those stories and movies, and right, that there's a whole direction there. But because his moral compass isn't broken, he's always conflicted. He's always striving for something else. And I think of him as being this guy who has his face up to the glass, and he's looking in at people leading ordinary lives that he can never have for himself. But if they call him and he answers that phone, he can go preserve that for other people as he tries, however imperfectly, to stumble his way towards learning the strange language of intimacy on his own.
Yeah, and I think in that way you can argue that Evan and Flora have some of the same goals. They both had a very different upbringing, so to speak, and they're both trying to figure out how to connect now in this new world where they don't necessarily feel like they belong because their experiences have made them outsiders. Now the other line I love in your books, and it kind of permeates the series, is forgive me, the DA, the
Mia Hall.
Mia.
Yeah.
She keeps talking about she is a single mom, and she's constantly talking to Evan about, it's hard work making a human, raising a human.
And for sissies.
Yes, and she has like inspirational quotes for her son, and you see how hard she is working as a parent, and you can see how for Evan that model of nurturing, I mean that's everything he didn't get, but in some ways he's trying to do to himself now. He's almost trying to parent himself and make himself
That's
a
right.
human.
And her son, 9-year-old Peter, is
Who's
like
so much fun, so much fun.
it's like his inner child, but
Yeah.
but raised right.
Yeah.
So there's this constant, set, and we get to see him be sweet with him in a way he could never be for himself, right? And then he never had or understood.
So for me, and When You See Me, the opportunity becomes for Dee Dee Warren, who again, when I first met her, was such a workaholic. Well, when she starts meeting Girl in this book, this sounds weird, but I'm so proud of my character Dee Dee, because she grew up and she became maternal. And you see like a whole new side of her, and she becomes so obsessed with she is going to save this one, and there's quite the bond. And to me, it's that satisfying feeling as a writer where, 5 books ago that wouldn't have been right for her, that would have felt weird. But when you read this book, it seems a very natural progression of what
What's
she
the
was headed.
piece she sees in Girl? Because once she sees her, she's like dog to bone to figure that out. What's the thing that she sees in Girl that frees something in her, that obsesses her so?
I think it's the desire to protect, to give a voice. We actually also know subtly in the book before this that Dee Dee was kind of wishing she had a second child. So we know she's kind of going through a little bit of that nesting phase, and then Girl comes along and it's a good fit.
So the other topic I thought was, I turned this off now, was really interesting. You've got a professional law enforcement person, at least one in the mix, right?
Yes.
And so, in the cases come to her in the course of her profession. You don't have to go searching for a reason for her to be at work.
Exactly.
And Greg's character is somewhat different, and this is a conversation we've had earlier with Nick Petrie and Joe Finder and a number of authors, is what do you do if you have somebody who isn't in law enforcement and isn't like a private eye, and is mission oriented, but where do they get the mission? And how is that different from writing a standalone, which I thought was a really interesting topic we talked about.
Well, the thing is with a lot of characters who we love, like Harry Bosch or James Bond, the question of motive is taken off the table, because it's like, well, why are they involved, right? And for the most part, it's because it's their job, right? That's how the adventures come in. And in standalones, I wrote a whole number of standalones, the motive can be anything. And by that, I don't mean to imply it's more simplistic, because they find, incredible ways to weave in emotion and everything else. But for the most part, the mechanisms by which stories arrive at them. And in standalones, the motive can be anything. It can be envy. It can be curiosity. And so for me, what was important when I was building when I was playing with the notion of starting a series, is I was thinking, what are all the avenues through which I want the ability to have stories come in? So for Evan, it can be the orphan program from his past catching up to him. It can be when that phone rings and someone calls and there's a mission. It can be the people he lives among who he's trying to sort of fit in with and understand at Castle Heights. There's all these avenues for stories to come in. And I think that sort of elbow room was important to me as somebody who primarily, before Orphan X, had written standalones. And When You See Me is such a weird combination of all of those in one. In this case, you have all of that jumble of motives, because all three arrive through a different vector, right?
Well, and that's one of the opportunities you have through law enforcement, particularly now in this day and age. We're having a lot of fascination with cold cases. And they are pertinent and they matter. And like you were talking about earlier, we want to write books on something we haven't done before. So When You See Me starts out as kind of a typical cold case scenario. There's skeletal remains that have been found, maybe the work of a serial predator, but no one really knows. Well, in law enforcement, you end up calling in a lot of different experts to try to assist with that. And so it made a natural situation, but like you said, it's a little more complicated in your universe. But I think we should also talk movies, because I like it when Greg talks about, but there's this, some actor that, originally signed for Orphan X. But then you lost him to another role. But now you still have things going on. Tell us about your movie life, Greg.
Oh wow, that sounds so glamorous. So I have Orphan X right now. I'm adapting it for television. I've been working on that, which has been a lot of fun. I'm co-creating the show with a screenwriter called Derek Kolstad, who's the creator of the John Wick series.
Oh, I love that series.
Yeah, he's a real talent. And so initially I'd adapted it for an actor, and I lost him to another movie, and so I had the feature side down, and then I kind of teased it out and went to TV. So there's different lanes, you know. And then I have a movie shooting right now in Pittsburgh that I co-wrote with a screenwriter called Philip Eisner, and that should be fun. It's called Sweet Girl. It's a revenge thriller from Netflix. It'll be starring Jason Momoa, and that'll come out next year.
Oh, nice. I have someone working on who has adapted the D.D. Warren, looking at each book as being a season
Yeah.
on kind of the Netflix
That's great.
HBO model. Mostly we talk about people who don't exist. So she'll call me, what would D.D. Warren have on her desk? Would it be a plant? Would it be a puzzle? Would it be a Zen garden? I'm like, not a Zen garden. But she might have destroyed a Zen garden that might be in her trash can. Even better, we're going to put a destroyed Zen garden in her trash can. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Zen garden didn't work.
Yeah.
Should we kick the questions?
I
What
think
do
we
you
should
think?
ask people what people want to hear about.
What do you find people want?
I feel like I
to
have
hear
my back to
from
the
us?
side. I'm sorry.
All right, that's it. We're going. Okay.
So what are both of your writing schedules? You write every day?
Well, he's manic. I don't think he's ever not writing. I write first thing in the mornings. I like it best before the real world finds me. And then I am a big hiker. I often go out into the deep, dark woods where I realize everything I wrote was trash and garbage. And then I come home and rewrite it. It's been 30 years. Still the same thing.
There's so many remains found in the woods. Take out your aggression. So you get up super early and you write, like, what's a good writing chunk for you?
I like to do 5 to 10 pages as a chunk, and then I
That's
play
how
with
many
them for a
hours?
bit.
Like you're up at...
Oh, I don't know. It can be anything from very quick to very long. It depends how much fast the hamsters, running in the mail.
Okay.
With
So
it. I'm trying to get a scene, so like from beginning to end. Yeah.
Like a chapter or
Yeah.
or a chunk of a healthy chunk of a chapter.
And you?
I'm kind of a mess right now because I have so many projects going on. I like to go...
I always say that.
I know. I like to just put my head down on one thing and go all the way through.
Well,
so
that's a bizarre process. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so, and I don't... There's a lot of travel, there's a lot of different projects. Like I used to write a whole rough draft of a novel, right? And now I'll get to a certain point where it's a resting point, but then I'll do, sometimes I'll need to do a rewrite of something, or I'll need to write a pilot. So there's a lot of interference. I'm trying to figure that piece out right now, but I basically just get up and write all day, every day. It just depends how much of that time is, figuring out how to juggle other things. At a minimum, I'm writing. Writing's so hard to say too, because sometimes you're just thinking, and sometimes I get stuck on a phone because it's the studio calls and you're dealing with something there, and then sometimes we're writing an interview, right? Or there's a lot of stuff that comes in, but I feel good if I can get a good solid chunk with my head down, but there's days, when I'm on a TV show, I wrote, there was one time I wrote breaking means when you decide the outline and you kind of break the story is the prolongs. And I broke and wrote a story in 23 hours, just sitting straight through. Because on a TV show, you don't have, if a television production shuts down, it costs $250,000 a day. There's just not an option to not have the script. And so there's times where I'll really size up and just be writing, and when I get to the end of a novel, I don't know if you do this too, when I see that downhill,
I love the downhill.
yeah, it's harder to not write than to write. And that'll, sometimes I have 16, 18-hour days. Like I'll just go.
Well, so how is it for you? So for me, the first 100 pages of a book can take me 6 weeks, but the last 100 pages can be 6 days. Because you see where you're headed to now. So it's weird, it's not linear at all.
Yeah, there's one book I wrote called Don't Look Back. I wrote a quarter of the book in 3 days.
Wow.
Because the structure of that book is like a string a spring, and I just push it down and down and down. And when it went, it was crazy. I wrote like 30,000 words in 3 days. Yeah. So it's it varies. Like if you catch a good tailwind, you just try and go.
Before we take any more questions, I think we'd like to say goodbye to our television audience. Thank you for joining us. Hope you had a good time.
All right, guys.